Thank you for joining us for another episode of Attribution Nation. In this series, we're stepping into the C-suite to hear directly from CMOs navigating today's most complex marketing challenges. From AI disruption and the age-old alignment battles with sales, we're going to unpack the real reporting and data problems that leaders are solving for, and even the ones that are still keeping them up at night. So join us for candid conversations that go beyond metrics into the strategies, experiments, and lessons that are shaping the future of marketing leadership. In today's episode, I am joined by Kimberly Storin, the CMO of Zoom. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about attribution, data, the challenges of modern marketing leadership. But where we're going to start is, Kim, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, where you came from, and how you ended up the CMO of the rocket ship that is Zoom.
Awesome. Yes, happy to. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate being here with you and sharing my story a little bit. So I came up through a non-traditional marketing path. I actually started my career in crisis communications before going back to business school and doing M&A management consulting for about 5 years. And that really was the starting place. I was doing a lot of work around communications, obviously, brand, sales alignment, etc., as a management consultant. And I had this opportunity to move in-house, go into industry, and decided to take the leap. So I came in through marketing in a little bit of a different path. I didn't necessarily have my fingers on the keyboard in terms of digital marketing coming through the comms and strategy side of the house. And so did a few brand transformations at some pretty big names you've probably heard of. I led the brand transformation at AMD. You know, the stock at the time was in the $1 range. Hard to imagine now, but we did a big pivot in terms of the brand and really came skyrocketing out of that J curve to be the business that it is today. I had a chance to build a cognitive systems business at IBM, which was really my first foray into AI in a meaningful way. So built a GPU accelerated server with NVIDIA way before it was cool and had the opportunity to be at the forefront of where IT and data science was moving in terms of machine learning, deep learning, and AI. And then, took some time to try a little bit of startup. So getting into the SaaS startup world, a PE-backed infrastructure company, and now I'm at Zoom. So I've really, built my career around the idea of, transformation of the brand, of the marketing function overall. And that's really what has kind of driven me. It's my passion. Being a transformation architect is who I am at my core. And it's really, been the thing that has driven me. It's been my mission. And I'm excited to join Zoom and really think about how we continue to evolve this marketing function.
Okay, you mentioned crisis communications, and I know this isn't really where we're going with this conversation, but and I'm not asking for specifics, but did you manage any crises that like I would know about?
So I managed a lot of crises. A lot of it was restructuring, bankruptcies, executive pay packages that were, very out of control at the time. There was others. I had a well-known gym that was a client, so had some very interesting crises that we worked from a day-to-day people in the gym situation. But a lot of it was more investor relations, financial types of crises. So not as sexy as you might think. Financial compensation and lots of, chapter 7, chapter 11s.
Okay. All right. It's when I hear crisis communications, I'm always like, oh, there's something juicy in there. I want to hear it. Awesome. So you did these different things and then you went into marketing. Like, what drew you to marketing? I mean, obviously communications and marketing are pretty similar, but what was it about marketing that kind of drew you to that?
So what I realized is that my background in communications really gave me a lens on brand that I think a lot of marketers were missing. And that was, understanding the brand as a strategic lever of growth, but also reputation. And so when I started getting into the marketing space, it was through the lens of brand. So I had the opportunity to work on some, very large acquisitions, including Gerber Nestle, and had the chance to build the brand strategy for what that integrated organization would look like. And had the chance to, to really kind of play into this idea of brand, looking at these divestitures, these acquisitions, and the criticality of the brand, and not the brand just like the look and the feel, which obviously, like thinking about Gerber, right? That Gerber baby is iconic, and you got to protect, those brand assets at every cost. But also in terms of, the message that you're bringing to the market, is it authentic to the products that you're delivering and what your customers expect from you? And so that was really like my foray into marketing was through the lens of brand. And ultimately my communications background gave me a great foundation for thinking about how to protect and use that. I mean, brand is our most valuable asset. And so that was really how I got interested in marketing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it seems like it was a pretty natural progression, despite the fact that like there was almost kind of like this diversion that just naturally brought you back into marketing. So
Absolutely.
interesting. And brand is absolutely our most valuable asset. That's why I've got a neon sign and a t-shirt behind me, because always got to be branding, right?
Right.
So totally agree with that. Now, you've obviously worked for some very, very large brands, and then you went into more of like the startup world, and now you're back at a very,
Yes.
large, well-known brand again. How has that shift kind of changed your perspective and how you approach things now, having been gone from big brand to little brand to big brand again?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the things that I've found is kind of the thread that pulls through all of that is that I've mostly worked with challenger brands, and brands that are trying to get a foothold in an industry that maybe they don't necessarily have the natural brand connection to. And whether it's been a full transformation or just even what I'm doing at Zoom, we're taking the reins at a very iconic brand, but one that is really changing. Like, we're no longer just meetings. We have a full breadth and depth of a platform and solutions that portfolio that people just don't know about. And so really, that challenger mindset has been something that has really come through in everything that I've done, whether that's been the biggest companies like an AMD that's competing day in and day out with the behemoth of Intel, although that script has flipped a little bit in the last few years, but back then anyway. Or, IBM in the AI server space, right, which was definitely, a new place trying to establish a foothold. And the work that I did in startups just really reinforced like my ability to think strategically about how to gain traction in a market where maybe the brand, even if it is an iconic brand, might not be as well known or known for the solution in that specific market or function. And how to do that creatively. Like, being in a startup, being in a PE backed company, you don't have a ton of resources. So you have to get really scrappy. You have to think strategically. You have to be piloting and trying things and experimenting, and you have to be killing things fast or scaling things fast. And I think, that VC and PE world really trained me well for the world that we live in now, right? Which is do more with less. And we have to be smart, we have to be scrappy, and we have to put our dollars towards the activities and strategies that really move the needle for the brand.
Yeah, I think that it's funny because I hear so many times when we talk to executives, we hear so much about like piloting and experimentation and getting creative, that it 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 kind of surprises me that it's such a common refrain. But then we also have so many organizations that don't do any piloting, don't do any experimentation. It is just the same thing that we've always done because that's the way we've always done it. Our very first podcast episode was with Aaron Bird, the founder of Visible and now one of the co-founders of Inflection. And that was one of the things that he said is that he always encouraged his marketing team to have an experimentation budget. It was almost like an R&D budget within marketing to just go try new cool shit and see what works, right? So,
well, if you really think about it, there's three things, right, that drive transformation, and that's curiosity. So always looking ahead at what's next. It's agility, like being able to look back and figure out what worked or what didn't. And then the ability to take calculated risks. And so when you really step back and think about what it takes to drive transformation, and those core attributes being the things that drive that transformation forward, it makes sense. Like those are the same things that you need to be thinking about when you think about piloting and experimentation. So to me, like it's one thing to just be at a cash cow business that's printing money. Must be nice, right? Where you don't have to think about constraints. You don't have to think about being flexible and agile in the way that you do as a challenger brand. But I think just by the nature and the definition of successful transformation, and if we think about the fact that marketing is the biggest growth lever, right? Brand is our most strategic asset, our most valuable strategic asset, but marketing is the growth lever within the organization. And you have to be taking that transformation approach. You have to be thinking about experimentation on a daily basis because otherwise you're going to fail. Look at what's happening right now with the transition from SEO to GEO and AEO. Whatever we're doing today is not the same things that we're going to be doing in 3 months, much less like 6 months from now. So we have to be willing to pilot and try. There's no framework. And if anybody tells you that there's a tried and tested framework for how to market for a world powered by LLMs, like they're lying. Like we're making up the playbook every single day. And so you have to be willing, if you are a marketing leader, to think about how to meet the speed of that market. And the great thing that I love about Zoom is that in Zoom's DNA, like we have the speed of Zoom. We call it that. It is like part of our DNA. And it's part of how we think. It's how we build our products. It's how we market. It's how we address the customer needs. And so that agility is really built into who we are as an organization, but not every company that I've been in has had, that same core competency around agility and speed.
Yeah, I mean, agility and speed, like I wish more organizations were as agile as Zoom is. But can you repeat those three things that drive transformation? I think that was like a really key thing that I just want to make sure that our listeners heard. What were those three things that drive transformation?
So it's curiosity, right? So your ability to look forward and predict what's next or how the market is going to change. It's agility, your ability to look backwards and see what didn't work or was working. And then, of course, it is the ability to take calculated risks.
Got it. Okay, perfect.
Not to be, you don't want to be risk adverse, but you also don't want to be taking risks at all costs. But being able to take those calculated risks is a predictor of successful transformation.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for repeating that. That was very helpful. You said so much stuff and my brain was swimming. I was like, I gotta know what those were. So you kind of segued into our next topic, which is the role of the modern CMO. And because you started talking about, today's challenges, which is, moving from SEO to now everybody's discovering brands through, LLMs and AI. How do you see the expectations of a CMO today versus 5 to 10 years ago?
So I think, the pressure on the CMO has gotten just more and more palatable. I think part of it is because marketing becomes a catch-all for a lot of things. And there's good aspects to that and there's challenging aspects to that. A lot of it becomes tactical, when you think about all the tools in our toolbox and, can you write a press release? Can you post on social? Can you make a video? Can you build a website? Can you come up with product naming? I mean, you just think about it. Marketing has to be able to be creative at the same time that we are data-driven, at the same time that we understand systems, at the same time that we understand the financials, and that we understand the products and solutions. And I could just go on and on of like all the things that we as marketers need to understand in order to do our job. But at the end of the day, like we need to be, a chief market officer or a chief growth officer or we need to be thinking about the future and where the company is heading and the strategy of the positioning and the strategy of the decisions that are getting made within that positioning framework. And I think so many times, like marketers get caught up in the tactics that it's harder to step back and say, what is the strategic vision for this brand? Where are we 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? Because there's so much pressure from the business to talk about what are you doing right now, this quarter for sales. And to be honest, I think that it is a detriment to the business if you have marketing thinking about current quarter. Now, if your sales cycle is transactional and it's like a 5-day sales cycle, different story, right? 50% of our business at Zoom is a faster transaction. So, my PLG motion is a little bit different, but when you're in the enterprise kind of SLG space, you should not be thinking about this quarter, right? You should be thinking about next quarter and the quarter after that and the year after that and the 5 years after that as a marketing leader. And I think sometimes all of the focus becomes, well, what are you doing for me right now to help close this quarter? And if we can't be thinking out further, we're going to be trapped in the never-ending death cycle of MQLs.
Okay, I got so much stuff to unpack here. This is fantastic. So I oftentimes use the analogy with my team. I base this analogy off the old saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. That as marketers, we have to be able to zoom in so closely on the trees that not only are we seeing the trees, we're seeing the leaves on the trees, but also zoom out and not only see that these trees make up a forest, but see the entire ecosystem that the forest lives in, right? But that is so difficult to do, to your point, when you have quarterly targets that have to be hit and we're in the middle of the quarter. So what are some of the things that you do to help maintain that balance of, okay, we've got to have some focus on the current quarter, but our primary focus needs to be 1, 2, 4 quarters down the road? Like, how do you manage that? Because obviously you get pressure from sales, you get pressure from CFOs and CEOs to we got to focus on this quarter, but we know that from a marketing perspective, it's not good to do that. So like, how do you handle those situations?
So, I mean, again, I think it kind of depends on the business that you sit in and where that business is positioned in the market, as well as like how long the sales cycle is. What's the deal velocity look like? And where's marketing's like legitimate impact? So I'll kind of answer the question like from my point of view in the organization that I'm in versus answering for everyone, because I think one of the challenges, and marketing does this all the time, right? We believe that there is a framework. So we go listen to a podcast, we hear somebody and they're like, here's how you do it. And we think and like I always say as an ex-management consultant, right, the best thing that we can do as marketers is like not apply those frameworks and instead be asking ourselves the strategic questions. So anyway, that's my setup for what will be like how I think about this. But what I try to do is working really closely with my MOPS team to focus on ensuring that we have the right reporting that is answering the right questions, that is aligned. And ultimately, I always say like every attribution model is fully flawed. We all know this. Anyone who tells you that it's not is lying. And the best attribution, and it's all BS, right? We also know this. The best attribution is an attribution model that sales and marketing agree on, right? We all know it's directional, but are we agreed that the direction that it's driving us is correct enough? And if we can get to that alignment, and we all know it's flawed, but we all think it's good enough, then you can really start to focus on the things that are moving the needle in the right way. And I think, overall, we get too focused on performance marketing. And so a lot of those measurement and that attribution model is not taking into account the value of the brand or those kind of top of the funnel levers. But to be honest, sales doesn't really care. So having a MOPS team that is with you by your side, that is 100% aligned with sales, is the best thing that you can do for that day-to-day question of what are you doing for me now, right? Being able to demonstrate conversion rates, where things are getting stuck in the funnel. We all know it's not a funnel, but just go with me, right? Where they're getting stuck, how we're unsticking them, where things are looking as we look out to next quarter. That is my MOPS and my alignment on how we communicate with and to our sales and broader revenue kind of brethren. There's so much more there, though, and so many more things to track than just the things that ladder up to that attribution model. And my corporate KPIs definitely recognize those, but those are only one layer, right? My team is tracking below that a lot of other business drivers and vanity metrics that are helping us shape what we do, when, and how. And so you've really got to be able to understand your audience. When you're going into those interlocks every week and forecast calls with sales, they do not want to hear about your share of voice or your share of search or your vanity metrics, or they want to understand those things that are focused on attribution, that are focused on hitting a number in the near term. And so I think that's what becomes really critical, is how you as a leader are reading the room, understanding the audience that you're speaking to, and ensuring that you're bringing the right level of information into each of those forums. And your MOPS partners are your best partners to help you go have those conversations, especially at the blocking and tackling standpoint. And so that's kind of how I think about it, is not everyone has to understand every metric that I'm looking at every week. Every audience needs something different, whether that's a corporate KPI, a weekly forecast or funnel KPI. And then there's a lot of stuff that I'm tracking in the background that no one needs to understand except for my team, right? And that's the things that are helping them. I think ROI is another place where we get trapped a lot. And one of the things that I've been trying to realign the team on is that ROI is a very useful metric when you think about it holistically. When you start thinking about it tactic by tactic, you will never win, because a top of the funnel brand building tactic will never drive a 3x or whatever your goal is ROI. But if you look at the aggregate, every quarter, every 6 months, every year, right, you can start to see that average ROI that gives you a sense of is my media mix right on point, or am I really skewed in one direction or another? But there's times that as marketers, we have to say, it's okay. I don't need, this quarter, I have to shift brand perception in this way, shape, or form. And I have to launch a new product or a new brand that my ROI is going to look different this quarter than it does typically, because really the return on investment is way more than a quarterly mindset, right? It is
it's a long tail. There's a long tail when it comes to ROI.
Right. And so I think those are the conversations, right, that I'm not having an ROI conversation in a weekly forecast call. It's not the audience. I'm having that conversation with my peers in an executive review or with the board But you've really got to know your audience and figure out where to focus the right information and make sure you're telling a story with the numbers, not just presenting a laundry list of numbers.
So much to unpack there. So it sounds like one of the ways that you manage that balance between short-term results and long-term strategic thinking is it sounds like you almost kind of like partition that out. You partition some of like the short-term thinking to like, hey, MOPS team, you've got the short-term stuff. You're looking at the how the funnel's working, and how leads are flowing and how we're achieving pipeline goals and targets. And then you've got strategic thinking happening separately outside of that. And it also depends on who you're speaking with in the organization at that moment. So it sounds like you kind of almost partition that within your organization. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. To a certain extent, I wouldn't say partition, right? Everybody has to be interlocked. It's more of how you're partitioning the communication and the rollout of those metrics, right? When I think about how we have a global and regional connection, there's no partition, right? They're both global is driving pipeline and revenue, and regional is driving pipeline and revenue. And so ensuring that, that interlock and that understanding across the field teams as well as your global demand gen teams is really, really critical. But when I'm talking about the partition, it's like kind of outside of marketing, right? Because it's really easy to get trapped in the death spiral if you start presenting metrics that are not really relevant to the broader conversation at hand.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it's also knowing your audience to who you're presenting to and making sure that the numbers and the story that you're presenting is tailored to that audience and their particular needs. Couldn't agree more on that point for sure. You mentioned something else that I want to just kind of touch on real quick is how the needs shift based on the needs of the business. So you mentioned like you might have a quarter where you have to go specifically like, reposition the brand or reorient the brand in the market or launch a new product. And therefore, most of our marketing is going to focus on this particular thing. And therefore, our measurement and metrics for this particular quarter are going to be different because the vast majority of our marketing is focusing on this thing. And I think that's really important to call out because it highlights the need that what you report on today may shift tomorrow. You may not have the same reporting needs tomorrow that you've got today. And Absolutely. You have to be really clear, and it's clear and concise in what your reporting needs are in that moment. And I think that a lot of organizations really don't think about it at that level. They just think about like, well, we got to track MQLs, we got to track conversion rates, we got to track pipeline, we got to track this. And it's the same thing with no deviation, even when marketing deviates from the typical plan.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge. Again, it's kind of that agile mindset, right? Of being able to understand your system's limitations and to come back to the core principle, which is if marketing is green, the business better not be red, right? And vice versa. So it's, that I think that sometimes is one of the things that's really hard for people. Like you can go have all of these MQL to SQL reports that you're looking at and you're like, marketing's killing it. And then you look at the actual business and you're like, well, why is our revenue down? And that's where we have to be really cautious about understanding that our models are directional, right? They are not perfect science. They are not necessarily predictive of where the business is heading holistically. And you have to stay tight and have to look at the business value drivers. And, the biggest value driver is revenue. And so, you can have a bazillion MQLs, but if those MQLs are sitting in, a sales accepted lead and not moving past that and getting cold, and you don't see your ARR increasing, then marketing's got a problem. So, ultimately, there comes a point where it's common sense that drives measurement and metrics.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's something I wanted to bring up, and this topic literally just came to me as we've been having this conversation. And I honestly can't think of anybody else better to have this conversation with. So Zoom as a brand benefited tremendously from a very specific thing that happened in the world that is completely outside of Zoom's control, right? Mm-hmm. You all skyrocketed because of the work from home thing that happened with COVID. I'm not saying it's only because of that, but you really took advantage of that and skyrocketed, right? Now, obviously we know, and this is also really timely because at the time we're talking about this, there's a massive market situation going on with Drift and SalesLoft. And what we're going to see coming out of this is people moving off of Drift and going to Qualified or Adobe Dynamic Chat or Intercom or one of Drift's competitors, right? So they're going to get this massive bump from this thing that they had no control over. As a CMO, how do you balance or try to identify these external market impacts that have a drastic impact on the business's performance, on marketing's performance? How do you identify those and then factor those into the way that you measure marketing and your analysis on marketing's performance to make sure that we don't get, hey, look at all this great thing that marketing's doing when 90% of the impact is coming from an external factor that's beyond your control? How do you manage that?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately, right, our job is to be the voice of the market and the voice to the market. And so we need to be thinking about the market broadly every single day and be following where the market is headed. Now, could you have predicted a global pandemic? Probably not, unless you had some ears on the ground somewhere. And so I think that that's a different type of market situation to be in, right? That becomes like agility and flexibility and speed. Ultimately, right? Because you just have that market situation happens and you just have to be ready to jump on that change and be able to move with the tide. Now, you think about more of what you're talking about, right? Which is there's a market inflection point, there's a, acquisition in the market, there's a sunsetting of a competitor's product. Like those things are absolutely within the purview of what marketing should be thinking about and gaming out every single day. And I think a lot of times, again, because we're so focused on the day-to-day tactics and that ING of the marketing function, that we sometimes forget that a big part of our job is competitive insights and market insights. So for me, I've built a team at Zoom that is focused on competitive and market insights that are constantly kind of feeding in that information of where's the market heading. Sometimes you can predict some of that and sometimes you can't, right? AMD, for example, when Intel stumbled, that was a huge market opportunity for AMD to take advantage of. And that's not just a marketing effort. That is an everything effort, right? You got to capitalize with development. You've got to capitalize with marketing. You've got to capitalize with product and everybody needs to be rowing in the same direction to truly capitalize on a market change of that type of magnitude when your biggest competitor has a pretty substantial, fumble. And it happened over time. It wasn't like overnight, Intel ended up in this situation. So you start to pick up on that. What are the customers talking about? What are you hearing in the market? What are you getting from your analysts? And start to build that game strategy in place of how do we rally development and product and marketing and, everyone else that we need in order to take advantage of this external opportunity. So having those teams in place that are listening with ears on the ground, having strong analyst relations, having strong PR function, having a competitive and market insights group really becomes critical to being able to react quickly.
Yeah,
But
because
you also have to listen, right? Like,
yeah, for sure. You have to listen because, I mean, ultimately, you are not going to be able to predict a global pandemic. You're not going to be able to predict that one of your largest competitors has a massive security breach.
right.
Like, you're not going to be able to predict those things. So it's important to have your ear to the ground
Yeah,
and then the agility and flexibility to jump on that thing and say, hey, this is an opportunity for us. Let's go do this, 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 and this. Like,
exactly.
and I love that you have a team that's devoted to that competitive and market research. That is
Yeah,
the ear to the ground that allows you to spot those things and then react to those things quickly.
exactly.
I love that. So, we've talked about this a little bit. We've kind of like hinted at this a little bit, but you know, we've all been in I mean, I've been in marketing for 20 plus years. You've been in marketing for a while. We know what marketing's looked like in the past. Where is the future of marketing leadership and marketing measurement heading over the next, 3 to 5 years? What are you saying? What are you thinking?
I mean, what I hope is that, that measurement takes the same direction of that we're seeing from a, MarTech standpoint, which is like we all know we over-indexed on technology. And now none of it works together. And now if you want to make one change, you break 50 things down the road. So I think there is an interest in simplification, consolidation. And my hope is that we'll start to take the same approach with marketing operations and measurement of, really stepping back to say, like, are we measuring the things that matter? Do we have the right vanity metrics in place? Do we have the right business value driver metrics in place? And like, let's not get caught up in the noise, right? We live in the attention economy right now. Like we have 6 screens going at every moment. We have news coming at us from every direction. Like we're all exhausted. And the best way that we're going to be able to move everything forward is by simplifying and consolidating and making sure that we're staying focused on the North Star. So that's my hope for where marketing measurement and operations heads is maybe a little bit more simplification than where we are currently. And, I would love to see a point where like we are truly measuring revenue and not, BS KPIs that don't necessarily tie to the health of the overall business. I would like to see, maybe it's net ARR, right? I'd like to see true life cycle being measured. We have to be measuring churn and understanding marketing's role in churn as much as we are about, new logo acquisition, if not more so. And so I think, those are the things that I would like to see change and become more systemic and pervasive across our discipline is that strategic view of simplification and really focusing on the full life cycle.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we always preach when we're talking to customers of ours is that when you're measuring something, there's really 2 critical things that you have to make sure that this measurement or this KPI or whatever it is matches. Number 1 is that it has to be interesting. And interesting means that it's something that this individual person is going to find to be interesting.
Yeah.
But number 2, and this is the most critical piece that most people don't look at, is that it also has to be useful. And I define useful as in, I'm going to be able to take some meaningful action because of this thing that I'm measuring. Because a lot of times we waste our time, and a lot of these end up being lumped in with vanity metrics. We end up measuring things because it's like, oh, this would be really interesting to know. But then it's like, well, what am I going to do with it? And it's like, I mean, I can't do anything with it. I'm really curious about it, but right. I can't really, it doesn't allow me to make any changes in the organization. So we always say interesting and useful. It has to be both for us to really prioritize it.
That makes sense.
But I love your point though, too, about churn analysis, because we find, like churn prevention stuff, we find so many organizations that spend so much time looking at like what's working which is great. Like we all want to know what's working. But what we also want to know is why do we lose business, right? So that can be churn prevention. It can be loss analysis. We find so many organizations aren't doing those things. And I would argue that knowing why we lose and why we lose deals and why we lose customers is probably more impactful than finding out what works.
Right. Right. I think you're right.
So awesome. So now let's jump into the last topic that we have here, which is a little bit about you and Zoom. You all have a large event coming up called Zoomtopia. Can you tell us a little bit about what this event means to Zoom and what it signals about Zoom's future-facing strategy?
Absolutely. So this is a really exciting moment for us. First of all, it's my first Zoomtopia, which I'm really jazzed about. But what I'm also really excited about is that this Zoomtopia, we've been really thoughtful about how we connect this to Zoom's purpose and North Star. And so if you think about what Zoom stands for and who we are, you look at our competitors, right? Microsoft has IT and procurement. Google has built this kind of by the way product suite, and Zoom has the people, right? You talk to anyone who lives on Zoom and they can't imagine their life without this platform. And it's become so integral into how they do business, how they collaborate, how they connect with their coworkers, with their customers, with their prospects, right? In a lot of ways. And so I'm really jazzed that this Zoomtopia is really for the people. That's the theme, Zoomtopia for the people. And we're putting the users and the people that leverage this platform every day into the forefront. So we're going to be, announcing a couple of big programs. I'm going to be on stage announcing our AI for Good grant program, which, really fits with that AI for the Zoom for the people message. And we're going to be, launching a program to democratize AI education. And we'll be committing to $5 million investment in North America for K-12 AI education, ensuring that students gain foundational AI literacy and have a clear pathway to succeed as we continue to see this ever-evolving digital economy. So that's really exciting. We're also going to be announcing a program called the Zoom US Solopreneur 50, which is an index that's going to be celebrating the most dynamic, high-growth innovators that are shaping industries in the economy. Kind of think about it as, our answer to programs like EY's Entrepreneur of the Year or Forbes Under 40 Under 40. The leaders may come from small organizations, but their impact is anything but small. And so we're really proud that we're able to democratize AI tools within our platform that give them the ability to drive outsized outcomes for their businesses. So we're really going to be celebrating those solopreneurs as well as the other, Zoom users who count on this platform every single day.
That's awesome. I love that fund that you're putting together. That's super cool. I love that. And if you're looking for, some Zoom customers that are, entrepreneurs, they're doing good things, like we are a Zoom customer. I'll throw my hat in the ring,
You can apply for the solopreneur program then when we launch that next year.
I might have to just, keep the company name and my name in mind when you see the application come across, Well, Kim, it's been great having you on the podcast. What we always do here is we close out with some key takeaways, and holy crap, do I have a lot of them. This has been fantastic. So just some quick takeaways that we heard is, number one, when you're an organization that is with a PE firm or that's owned by a PE firm, one of the things that you have to do is you have to pilot new things. You have to fire things fast, and you have to scale things fast. I love your 3 things that drive transformation: curiosity, agility, and taking calculated risks. I love that. Huge fan of curiosity personally. I always have this mantra: instead of saying, I wonder, I always say, I should find out. So, I mean, the world's knowledge is at our fingertips. We carry around our phones. Why not look it up instead of wonder, right?
Well, and try keeping a curiosity journal. It's a great way to be able to go back and like really put deep thought into like the random things that spark your curiosity during the day.
Oh, I like that. I like that. A curiosity journal. Another key takeaway.
There you go.
Another one is that, CMOs need to think like a chief market officer. Marketing can't always be thinking about the current quarter. We have to be able to look out and ask, what's the strategy? Where are we headed? We have to look 2, 3, 4, 5 quarters down the road. We can't just get so hyper-focused on current quarter.
Right.
And one of the things that helps with that is having a MOPS team that is with you 100% of the time and is able to answer those questions about what is working now and what is not working now in the current quarter. And then this is all part of the same conversation, is you mentioned also that you have to know your audience. You have to be able to read the room and know what they care about and report on those things. And then to that same thing is with your audience, if marketing's got green lights flashing, the marketing's doing great, then the business better not be red. Because quite frankly, if marketing is green and the business is red, then we're out of alignment and our goals and KPIs we might as well not even be speaking the same language.
Yeah. That's exactly.
I loved your quote about we have to be the voice of the market and the voice to the market. I love that quote. And then another one in that same kind of conversation with that one is that in order to take advantage of these big like external market impacts, we have to be agile and flexible, and we have to have somebody with their ear to the ground that is listening for these things so that we can spot them and then take our action. And you're doing that through, like a competitive and market research team, which is just brilliant. And then lastly, the biggest one here is that we have to stay focused on the North Star. Focus more on simplification and not over-indexing. What are the key things that are the most important to us as an organization, and focus on those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kim, it's been awesome. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time and your thoughts and insights here. I don't know that I've ever had more key takeaways in one of these episodes. So I think you might have set the record there.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.